In a tremendous victory for those who oppose critical race theory, Christopher Rufo appeared on Joy Reid's MSNBC show, and boy, did she look bad. Chris Rufo, of course, is one of the leading experts on critical race theory as an opponent of the ideology and regularly speaks out against it. Joy Reid of MSNBC quoted him, called him out, and made some critical comments. And then Rufo challenged her to a debate, effectively. While Reid had him on the show, she lied, she deflected, she refused to let him speak, and Chris still ended up making her and critical race theory look stupid and bad. Now, this debate wasn't that long, and it's quite difficult to say that this is the be-all, end-all, one of the greatest moments ever, but it was a victory. I'm sure by now you've heard me say, we had Steve Bannon on the Timcast IRL podcast. Go to timcast.com, become a member, check out the members-only segment we did, because hoo boy is it spicy, and I waste no time asking the question that YouTube does not allow you to ask. But Bannon said, we're winning. The violence is a problem. The insurrection, January 6th, was a problem. We're winning. Come August 15th, when these parents go to school, when their kids go to school and the parents see what these kids are being taught, they're going to lose it. School boards across the country are lighting up as parents say no to the cult ideology. Seems to me that the establishment, the woke establishment, has become desperate. They're flailing. And so the best they can do is try and claw and grasp at straws, and they just can't do it. Now, on this MSNBC show, I'm sure you'll hear from a lot of leftists saying like, oh man, Christopher Rufo looks so dumb. I'm going to prove that Christopher Rufo is correct. And it's not so much about whether he was correct or whether he looks good or bad. It's kind of what it's about. It's the feeling you get, right? What I want to say is it's not about Christopher Rufo being able to prove anything. Now, to me, it is. Maybe to you it is, because we care about facts and logic. But what happened was Reid looked flustered, confused, angry, emotional, and Chris Rufo came with quotes and made clear, distinct points. Joy Reid did not. This was a trouncing. What we hope for is that regular people see the attitude of Joy Reid and say, I don't understand what she was talking about. You see, I often say, that conservatives spend too much time fighting in the left's battlefield, using their terms, making arguments in their ideology, and in this instance, on their show. The issue with this is, as I explained it, is if you have a red battlefield and a blue battlefield, and the red battlefield individuals are attacking blue, right? Red versus blue. What ends up happening when the warriors of the blue only ever talk to regular people to recruit them, but they only have ever seen red? They hear that blue is bad. They don't know anything about blue. You don't talk about blue. All that happens is they say red, 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 and you're like, no, red bad. You get my point? Everything is framed in their worldview. Now, in this instance, this is one of the rare victories where they invited someone into their home turf, and it was a mistake. They let him too close to home. Rufo was now able to crack through, express some ideas to people who would normally never hear them, succinctly, precisely, and correctly. Here's the story from Media Busters to say, kaboom! On her show, Joy Reid gets sunk by critical race theory critic. They say, despite the best yet pathetic efforts Wednesday night to win a debate about critical race theory by yelling over her guest, putting words in his mouth, and trying to deny reality, MSNBC Reid out host Joy Reid didn't stand a chance against the Manhattan Institute's Christopher Rufo, who she had a dust-up with on Twitter. The highly contentious interview began with Reid throwing shade at Rufo for going after her on Twitter and suggested he was the problem. But despite quoting him and inviting him on the program, she failed to do her research and find out his background. This is really interesting. She said, are you an expert on race and racial theory? Are you a lawyer or a legal scholar? Yes. Quite literally, Rufo is a legal scholar at the Manhattan Institute. He is an expert on this. Now, let me just show you something very, very simple before we spend too much time getting into the nitty-gritty of critical race theory to prove my point. Over at Mediaite, they say, Joy Reid and opponent of critical race theory clash in train wreck interview. Next time, quote, give me at least a chance to complete 2 sentences. Mediaite is not a right-wing website. They actually lean fairly left. And as you can see, even the way they framed it, Joy Reid wouldn't even let Rufo talk because she was wrong. One of the funniest things she said, let me read a little bit of this. Quote, "You were reading it with the framing, calling me a political operative, which I'm not. I'm actually a think tank scholar," Rufo shot back. Rufo proceeded to call out and break down the 4 biggest lies Reid has told about critical race theory and its proliferation in public schools. I want to stress this point right now for those that are listening. I'm going to give you some resources and proof, and I'm going to show you citations to back up what Rufo says to prove what he is saying is true. And you can use this video to share with your friends. Maybe they don't want to see me ragging on MSNBC, sure, fine, but at least use the sources. Rufo proceeded to call out and break down the lies. "You've claimed in recent weeks that critical race theory isn't being taught in schools. You've claimed that most American public school students learn what you call Confederate race theory and are taught that slavery was, quote, not so bad. You've claimed that state legislation will prevent schools from teaching about history of racism. And finally, you've claimed critical race theory isn't rooted in the philosophical tradition of Marxism." Instead of addressing Rufo on the topic and the merits of his argument, Reid chose to argue with him about who he's called out as a supporter of critical race theory. After reading some quotes from one of her friends refuting his suggestion, Rufo quipped about how it's very interesting to me that so many people are running away from the label of critical race theory. Looking to use the words of critical race theorists against him, Rufo quoted Barbara Applebaum, who said all white people are racist, and Robin DiAngelo, who said white identity is inherently racist. The use of quotes triggered Reid to launch into a shouting fit where she refused to let Rufo speak while he was calling her out for playing word games. So what ends up happening is that Reid says, Robin DiAngelo is not a critical race theory. Kendi is not a critical race theorist. They are. Okay, here's what you need to understand. The difference between critical race theory in practice, or critical praxis as they call it, and academic critical race theory, which is teaching someone what critical race theorists think. Ibram X. Kendi has stated, and I think I've got Chris Rufo pointing this out, that his work is completely inspired, or I should say his work is inspired by critical race theory. These people clearly take core ideology from critical race theory and expand upon it. That's called creating a subset, right? So Reid just says she's not a critical race theorist. White identity is inherently racist. No. So what you're doing is playing a series of word games. No, says Reid. Rufo says, that critical whiteness studies, that's ironic, is a subfield of critical race theory. It is. No, it's not. These are deeply interrelated. No, they're not. They're just not. Reid isn't saying anything. Look, you can parade around and say, we win, like with the Crowder versus Ethan Klein thing. The right can say we win, the left can say we win, but there is an objective reality about what makes sense and what doesn't and who won and who didn't. And so I'll explain to you my argument. I think it's stupid when people tribalistically are like, Crowder wins, and the left is stupid tribalistically like, Ethan Klein wins. I'll make something very simple. What I like to do is ask people who aren't involved in politics what they think. And so what ends up happening is you see a video from Steven Crowder where he's like, hey, Ethan, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. So I'm, curious. Can you tell me where you think I was wrong? Ethan Klein responds by bringing in someone else. Now, most people don't know who that someone else is, and I'm not going to say his name. And the immediate response I get from friends is, wait, I don't understand. I thought the Crowder guy was going to debate the Ethan guy. Why did the Ethan guy bring someone else in? That's the first question asked. They don't go, oh, snap, Ethan, you got Crowder, what? They're confused by what just occurred. I thought it was a debate between Ethan and Crowder. Who's this other guy? What's happening? I'm confused. Then everyone starts yelling and they go, I don't know what this is. It doesn't make Crowder look bad. He opened up honestly. The people who are already predisposed to hate Crowder will hate him, and to like him will like him. Now, when it comes to Reid and Rufo, the reason this is beneficial is that when a layman watches this and you hear someone saying, Robin DiAngelo is a critical whiteness study, which studies theorist, which is a subset of critical race theory, who has made these claims that all white people are racist, and the other person's going, no, excuse me, no. That's right. A very Trumpian tactic. Of course, the people who liked Trump liked that he did, and the people who hated him didn't like that he did it. And truth be told, Trump narrowly won that election. And I know a lot of people who are like, I don't know what he's saying. Now, there is a debate tactic that is beneficial in trying to shut down your opponent. But in my experience and in my conversations, this went really, really bad for Reid, who came off as arrogant and confused. And the only thing she had to say was, no, no, that's not true. No, no. That's it. That's not an argument. She should have said something like, well, hold on a minute. You're saying that critical whiteness studies is critical race theory? I mean, they're two different things. You take a look at the writer, Robin DiAngelo. She is not known as a prominent critical race theorist, though she has written some critical race theory. No, I reject the premise. I think you're arguing too deeply and too broadly. She didn't do anything like that. Not that I actually agree with those arguments. The point is, it is a subset. No. She didn't even do that. She said, no. Reid even had the nerve to snap at Rufo and claim she doesn't allow people to just make up and say lies on the show. Okay. All right. Let's not waste time. Let's go back to what Rufo said. You claimed in recent weeks that critical race theory isn't being taught in schools. Well, this is semantics. What we know is that critical praxis is appearing in schools. That is, they're taking the teachings of critical race theory and critical theory, Marxist thought, and injecting it into curriculum. They're not going, I mentioned this before, the teachers aren't going, everybody, I'd like you to open up the latest book by Kimberly Crenshaw, and we're going to read her Vox article. That's what the left is arguing, a semantic game. It is being taught in schools. It's being applied in schools, is a better way to put it. You claim that most American public school students learn what you call Confederate race theory. That's just absurd and not true. The Confederates lost and are taught that slavery was, quote, not so bad. That's insane. The North won. Where do you live, lady? You claim the state legislation will prevent schools from teaching about the history of racism, and that's also absolutely false. The legislation that was put forward by, say, Ron DeSantis explicitly talks about disparaging people on the basis of race and doesn't say you can't teach people about racism. But what they're doing here is what they're actually saying is that the 1619 Project, which is attempting to teach people an alternate version of history or a reframing that isn't inherently true, by banning that, they're saying that's the history of racism. They are lying to you. Now, here's my favorite part. Finally, you've claimed critical race theory isn't rooted in philosophical tradition of Marxism. I would like to play a game with all of you. I would like to play a game where I pull up the sources and prove to you that it is in fact true. I bring you now to Critical Race Theory, the key writings that formed the movement by Kimberly Crenshaw. Crenshaw is one of the foremost notable figures in terms of critical race theory. In this book from 1995, published by the New York New Press, distributed by W.W. Norton & Co., we get this, which says on page 29, principally organized by Kimberly Crenshaw, Neil Gatanda, and Stephanie Phillips, the workshop drew together 35 law scholars who responded to a call to synthesize a theory that, while grounded in critical theory, was responsive to the realities of racial politics in America. Indeed, the organizers coined the term critical race theory to make it clear that our work locates itself in intersection of critical theory and race, racism and law. To be sure, while we have emphasized throughout the liberal and critical poles against which critical race theory developed, in experience such dialectic relations produce it less of a sharp break and more of a creative and constitutory engagement with both traditions. This is true not only of the content of critical race theory, but it is true well of the workshops participants. Indeed, both liberal race theorists and critical legal theorists have been deeply engaged in critical race discourse, and so on and so forth. The key takeaway, just to clarify again, is that they say that to make it clear that our work locates itself in the intersection of critical theory and race. They say they used the phrase critical race theory to make it clear that it is rooted in critical theory. Now, I bring you to Stanford. If Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is not enough for you in terms of appropriate sources, sorry, I can't help you. The Stanford from plato.stanford.edu says, Stanford's Encyclopedia of Philosophy, critical theory, published March 8th, 2005. Critical theory has a narrow and broad meaning in philosophy and in the history of the social sciences. Critical theory is in the narrow sense, designates several generations of German philosophers and social theorists in the Western European Marxist tradition known as the Frankfurt School. Okay, the Frankfurt School was a school of social theory and critical philosophy associated with the Institute for Social Research and Goethe University, Frankfurt, founded in the Weimar Republic during the European interwar period. The Frankfurt School comprised intellectuals, academics, and political dissidents dissatisfied with the contemporary socioeconomic systems, capitalist, fascist, communist, of the 1930s. The Frankfurt theorists proposed that social theory was inadequate for explaining the turbulent political factionalism and reactionary politics occurring in the 20th century liberal capitalist societies. Critical of capitalism and of Marxist-Leninism as philosophically inflexible systems of social organization, the school's critical theory research indicated alternate paths to realizing the social development of society as a nation. The Frankfurt School perspective of critical investigation is based upon Freudian, Marxist, and Hegelian premises of idealist philosophy to fill the omissions of 19th century classical Marxism, which did not address 20th century problems. To put it simply, they were critical a bit of some Marxism-Leninism, and it's very similar to what we see in critical race theory. The critical race theorists felt that critical theory itself didn't understand American political race politics, so they created critical race theory to build upon critical theory, which was built upon the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School was not happy with classical Marxism, and they expanded upon that. And from there, you expand into critical theory, et cetera, et cetera. It is all rooted in Freudian, Marxist, and Hegelian premise of idealist philosophy. There is so much to break down in the root of what this is. But there's a reason why they lie and claim it's not Marxist, it's not happening. Because they know regular people in this country, with their limited understanding of Marxism, still do not like it. It's why when you hear people say things like cultural Marxism, when they refer to critical race theory, the left and the media screech and say it's a conspiracy theory and it's not true. It's effective. Cultural Marxism is the better way to frame things. Unfortunately, and with all due respect, people like Christopher Rufo keep engaging in battle on the leftist terms. Say identitarianism. Say you just want law based on race. Well, Martin Luther King had a dream and was not a fan of judging people on the color of their skin. Let them respond in any way they want. Say, okay, sure, fine, it's a great point, but I'm not going to judge someone based on the color of their skin. It's not going to happen. I don't know. You take it up with Dr. King. I know the man believed a lot of things, and he believed a lot about specific policies, but we don't judge people based on their race. Sorry, it's not how it works. It needs to be referred to as either wokeness in the simplest terms, identitarianism in a more specific term, or perhaps cultural Marxism. You need to not use the left language. As I explained earlier on, what happens is when Christopher Rufo engages in a debate on critical race theory, the framing is always around that ideology. And as the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. So what happens? Well, the people who hear this only hear critical race theory. They don't hear other ideas. They're not hearing classical liberalism. They're not hearing about freedom or individuality. They're only hearing about critical race theory. This means that people's worldview will be rooted in these ideas, either for or against them. And as I said, out of sight, out of mind. If every day you wake up and you think to yourself, man, I sure do hate critical race theory, it's the only thing you're thinking about. You're still thinking about it. Your conversations are still centered around it. When you start talking with people about it, some people will agree and some people won't. I've made this point many, many times in the past few years that it is not, one of the reasons there's no such thing as bad press is that when you put out a message, some people hate it and some people like it. If someone smears you in the media, I'll put it this way. Let's say CNN says Christopher Rufo is dumb. There's a lot of people who read CNN who hate CNN. No joke. So they'll immediately be like, well, I like Christopher Rufo. So it's still good for him. In this instance, I will stress that Reid looked really bad because she had nothing to say other than you're wrong. No, you're wrong, wrong, wrong. Similar to how Trump did that debate. Sure, I can find it funny. I don't think it's particularly effective. Maybe in this setting, it's not as effective. In a political setting, it may be a bit more effective to shut down your opponent, prevent them from speaking. That maybe was what she was trying to do because she really had nothing. It's still a problem, though, that we keep engaging the left in their terms. So long as they control cultural institutions and we are constantly fighting them and not fighting for things, we are going to be fighting a downhill battle. We're on their turf. They control the ground. They can say what they want. They can ban who they want. And even in this capacity, Joy Reid said, I can do my show how I want and stopped Rufo from talking. That's part of the problem. Again, I think it made her look bad. And this was all around good for those who oppose critical race theory. And there are some pitfalls we can address. The problem is the left won't engage in conversations in the other direction. Rarely will a conservative try to actually go on a right-wing show. Why? They understand how this works. It's to their advantage. This is why you'll see these leftists who ambush people like Crowder. They won't actually organize. Well, in this instance, that guy's desperate, and it's so cringy. But I've reached out to many leftists who refuse to do it. Guess what happens? The only leftists who agree to do these discussions and debates are those with tiny followings and are desperate for attention. Not all of them, but many of them. The prominent leftists do not fight them on their home turf. As Ian Crossland said on the Timcast IRL podcast, don't fight an alligator underwater. If you were going to fight an amphibious creature, you'd do it where you have the advantage. So here's what happens. So long as we keep going to their battlefield to fight them, we keep losing. Perhaps one of the things that needs to happen, okay, you can go to these school boards, you can protest this stuff, and I have respect for those who are doing it. But one of the things that needs to happen, I would say, is school board parents going to school board meetings should propose things, should demand classical liberal teaching. I demand we teach classical liberal praxis and apply John Locke to all of our teachings and see what they say before something. Right now, you've got people in the middle saying no. And you can only pull them so far away where you're constantly battling them, but they're pulling and taking ground. If you're further in a different direction, say you're over here classical liberal, and you're telling these people no, then you can end up in the middle. It's the big ask. Trump knows it. You say, I want $1 million. And they go, $1 million? That's crazy. Okay, fine. Give me $500,000. Oh, wow. 50% off. You see how it works? You want to sell something that's worth $10 and you say, give me $20 for it. They'll be like, I'm not giving you $20 for it. It's worth $10. All right. How about 15? That's still way too high. Fine. 12. All right, cool. That's how you do it. It's the big ask. Bravo to Rufo. It was a great job. We'll have more conversations on this, but keep in mind, what I'm showing you about critical race theory. They're lying. They're panicked. They're desperate. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.